Welcome. It's great to have all of you worshiping with us today. And if you're a first-time guest with us, I would encourage you to take one of those tickets in front of you, fill it out. When the service is over, my wife and I will be out in the hub by the cafe. Bring it out to us. We would love to meet you, connect with you, give you a gift bag. If you're at our Sault Ste. Marie campus, please fill out that card and take it to Jeff in the back. He would love to do the same. Well, we welcome everyone. So many different people through so many different venues. And however you're watching right now or listening, we just want you to know we consider you to be part of the family. So thank you. Those here in the main auditorium, we welcome our classic service that meets every Sunday morning at 9 o'clock down in the chapel. Of course, our Sault Ste. Marie campus, our Alpena campus, our online campus all over America and the world, even Hong Kong this morning. We welcome all of you. We welcome our TV audience, our radio audience, and all those different watch groups to get together and watch either our service or our TV broadcast at the Brook, over at the Porches, in Bois Blanc Island, in Harbor Springs, up in Canada, down in Jackson, North Carolina. Of course, the Tall Timber Church down in Silver Spring, Florida, and it is official. I will be visiting you at the Tall Timber Church coming up this winter. Looking forward to that, and made those arrangements yesterday. And of course, we also want to welcome those who are watching at the Kinross Correctional Institute, about 100 inmates who get together every Sunday morning and watch our TV broadcast. So no matter how you're watching, where you're watching, thank you for being part of our worship today. Well, today we want to wrap up our series we've been calling Happy Holy Days. And we've been studying together the feasts of Israel as seen in the Old Testament. Now remember, in Leviticus 23, God outlines for Israel 7 feasts that they're to observe, they're to celebrate. And that chapter begins saying, the Lord spoke again to Moses, saying, speak to the sons of Israel and say to them, here are the Lord's appointed times, which you shall proclaim as holy convocations. And over the last 2 Sundays, we walked through those 7 feasts. I shared with you that each of those feasts have a historical significance. They point back to an important time in Israel's history. But more importantly, each of those feasts looked ahead. They were a foreshadowing of the coming Messiah that we, of course, know to be Jesus Christ. Now remember, the first 4 feasts all happened during the spring harvest, and all foreshadowed elements of the first coming of Jesus. While the last 3 feasts, which ultimately happen in the fall, are a foreshadowing of his second coming. And we looked at what each of those meant in the life of Christ. Let me just review them real quick. We know that Passover was a foreshadowing of Jesus' death. And then you had unleavened bread, the foreshadowing of his burial. First fruits, the foreshadowing of his resurrection. And then you had the Feast of Pentecost, sometimes called the Feast of Weeks, which was a foreshadowing of how Jesus, after ascending back to heaven, would pour out his Holy Spirit, who would indwell believers and the church would begin. And then when we move to the fall feasts, you have the Feast of Trumpets, which was a foreshadowing of the return of Jesus. You had the Day of Atonement, a foreshadowing of how at the second coming, Israel will realize who Jesus is, and many Jewish people will come to faith in Christ. And then we saw the Feast of Tabernacles, or Booths, which was a foreshadowing of the fact that when Jesus returns, he's going to set up a literal physical kingdom on earth where he will rule and reign for 1,000 years. So all of these feasts are very significant. However, what I want to do today is I want to look a little more in-depthly at 3 of them. Because of the 7 feasts, 3 of them seem to have special implication. Because 3 of the feasts, God commanded that every Jewish male would gather together in one place. That place would become Jerusalem to celebrate those 3 feasts. And you find that in Deuteronomy chapter 16. And look what it says in verse number 16. It says, 3 times in a year, all your males shall appear before the Lord your God in the place which he chooses, which would become Jerusalem. They're going to do it at the Feast of Unleavened Bread, at the Feast of Weeks, or Pentecost, and the Feast of Booths, or Tabernacles. And notice it says, when they appear for these three feasts, they shall not appear before the Lord empty-handed. Every man shall give as he is able, according to the blessing of the Lord your God, which he has given to you. So of these feasts, 3 of them required every Jewish male that lived within a certain vicinity of Jerusalem to travel to Jerusalem so they could celebrate that particular feast together. That included the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which involved Passover. Remember, Passover and unleavened bread are an 8-day festival. You have Passover day 1, and then you have unleavened bread that starts on day 2 and lasts for 7 days. So many times in the Bible, in the New Testament, when it talks about Passover, it's including unleavened bread. When it talks about unleavened bread, it's including Passover. So for that feast, they all had to go to Jerusalem. Then there was the Feast of Weeks, or Pentecost. That happened 7 weeks later, 50 days later. They had to return to Jerusalem. And then, in the fall, several months later, was the Feast of Booths, or the Feast of Tabernacles. And for all 3 of those feasts, every Jewish male had to return to Jerusalem in order to celebrate and commemorate that festival together. So that caused me to really look at those 3 feasts and say, okay, what is significant about those 3 feasts that can apply to you and I now as we celebrate our holiday season? Now, before we get to that, let me remind you of this. That each of the feasts, these 3 feasts, in which you had to come to Jerusalem to observe, each of them were connected to the beginning of a harvest. Passover celebrated the first grain harvest, the barley harvest. Pentecost celebrated the wheat harvest. And Tabernacles celebrated the harvest of olives, grapes, pomegranates, figs. And so all of these feasts had an element to them that would be very similar to what we just did recently called Thanksgiving. It was a celebration of thanksgiving to God for the harvest. Now remember what these feasts commemorated. Passover commemorated the night God passed over the houses of the Jewish people in Egypt, the death angel, because they had the blood over the doors. And then Egypt, they're released from. Pharaoh lets them go. They go so quickly, they can't let the bread rise. They only eat unleavened bread. That's what Passover and unleavened bread commemorated. Pentecost commemorated 50 days later, according to Jewish tradition, when God gave the law to Israel through Moses. And then you had Tabernacles, the last of the 7 feasts, which commemorated the 40 years that Israel wandered in the wilderness, and God provided miraculously for them. Now, when you look at those 3 feasts, what can we learn to make our holiday celebration more meaningful this year? Well, a couple things. First is this. The first thing I noted was that each of these feasts, whether it be unleavened bread, whether it be Tabernacles or Pentecost, each of them was a celebration of a certain attribute of God. And when I looked at that celebration, it seemed to be a direct parallel to our holiday season of Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's. Let me show them to you. Because really, if I were to say to you, what is the holiday season all about? What would your answer be? Hopefully the answer would be this. The holiday celebration, the holiday season is a celebration of who God is. We see that in the feasts. We see it in our holiday celebration. So let's start with tabernacles. Tabernacles was a celebration of a God who provides. Remember, tabernacles commemorated the 40 years Israel's in the wilderness. How did they get food during that time? God miraculously provided manna. How did they get water during that time? God miraculously provided fresh water out of a rock. How did they know where to camp and when to move? God provided a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. So as Israel got together in Jerusalem to celebrate tabernacles, or what was called booths, it was a celebration of a God who provides. And I thought, well, that's exactly what our Thanksgiving is all about, isn't it? Exactly. Our Thanksgiving is all about celebrating a God who has provided for us. In fact, the Bible teaches us not only why we should give thanksgiving to God, the Bible teaches us specifically how we can give thanksgiving to God. And you find that in Psalm 100. And notice some elements of it. It begins with these words. Shout joyfully to the Lord, all the earth. So what's one way that we can celebrate a God who provides? And the answer is we can shout our praise and thanksgiving to him. That was so very common among the nation of Israel in the Old Testament, to shout their thanksgiving to God. And there's nothing at all wrong. In fact, it's very biblical when you are overwhelmed with thanksgiving to a God who provides for you to shout your thanksgiving to him. If there's one thing we need to become, it's a little more of a shouting church, right? Because there you go, one person's into it. Because this is a biblical way to give thanksgiving to God. Notice another one. Shout joyfully to the Lord, all the earth. Serve the Lord with gladness. How can I celebrate a God who provides? By serving him. And every time I serve him, I'm celebrating a God who provides. Then it says, come before him with joyful singing. So I can celebrate a God who provides by shouting. I can celebrate a God who provides by serving. I can celebrate a God who provides by singing. And then it says, know some things about the Lord. So what's another way that I can celebrate a God who provides? Yes, by shouting. Yes, by serving. Yes, by singing. But number 4, by studying. By learning more about him. And the more I learn about the God who provides, that is the way that I celebrate him. And it says, here's some things you should know. Know that the Lord is God. Know that he made us. Know that we're his people. And then it talks about what I would call supplication. Enter his gates with thanksgiving. Enter his courts with praise. Give thanks to him and bless his name. What does it mean to bless his name? How do you bless his name? The word bless means to speak well of. You speak well of him. How do you celebrate a God who provides? You speak well of him. And it gives examples. Here's some things that you can say. For the Lord is good. How many of you know that God is good? The Lord is good. And then it says, his loving kindness is everlasting. I love that. Notice it doesn't just say his kindness is everlasting. It says his loving kindness is everlasting. So let me ask you a question. What's the difference between kindness and loving kindness? What's the difference? Well, a Sunday school teacher asked her third grade class that one Sunday, And a little boy answered this way. He said, if I were hungry and you gave me a piece of bread, that would be kindness. But if you spread some jelly on that bread, that would be loving kindness. How many of you know that we serve a God who doesn't just give us bread? He spreads jelly on the bread. His loving kindness is everlasting. And then it gives another one. His faithfulness is to all generations. Think about it. The same God that was faithful to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, Daniel, Jeremiah, David, was the same God who was faithful to Peter, James, John, Mary, Joseph. And he's the same God who was faithful to my great-grandpa, my grandpa, and my dad. And he's the same God who's faithful to me. And he's the same God who will be faithful to my son and my grandson and someday great-grandsons, because he is faithful to all generations. And so we learned that the Feast of Tabernacles was a celebration of giving thanks to a God who provides. Very similar to our Thanksgiving celebration. But then look at another one. How about Passover and unleavened bread? Well, if Tabernacles is a celebration of a God who provides, Passover, unleavened bread, is a celebration of a God who rescues. That's what it was all about for Israel. They were commemorating, celebrating how God rescued them from slavery in Egypt. And I thought, wow, isn't that what our Christmas is all about? I mean, folks, what is Christmas at its heart? It is a celebration of the greatest rescue mission that's ever happened in the history of our world. When God didn't just rescue us from physical slavery in Egypt, he rescued us from spiritual slavery to sin. I think it's described perfectly in Ephesians chapter 2. The first 3 verses talk about our slavery, talk about our bondage. Look what it says. And you were dead in your trespasses and sins. Speaking of us, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Yeah, if you're not sure, you're in real trouble, okay? That's a bad thing. In which you formerly walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, of the spirit that's now working in the sons of disobedience. Among them, we too all formerly lived in the lusts of our flesh. Is that a good thing or a bad thing, church? That's a bad thing. We were indulging the desires of the flesh and of the mind. Is that a good thing or a bad thing, church? Bad. We were by nature children of wrath, even as the rest. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? That's horrible. Horrible. But in between verse 3 and 4, God creates Christmas. And verse 4 begins with 2 of the most wonderful words in all the Bible, but God, rich in mercy, because of his great love with which he loved us. Even when we were dead in our transgressions, he made us alive together with Christ. By grace you have been saved. What is Christmas? It is a celebration of a God who rescues us. Amazing. So Tabernacles is a celebration of a God who provides, our Thanksgiving. Passover, a celebration of a God who rescues, our Christmas. But what about Pentecost, the other one where they all had to gather together? I believe this is a celebration of a God who guides. In the Jewish mind, Pentecost was a celebration of the fact that God gave Israel the law through Moses. He gave them a guide in the law. And friends, to me, that's our New Year's Day, isn't it? Our New Year's Day should be a celebration of a God that we can count on to guide us into an unknown new world, new year. I mean, let's be honest. No one in this room has any clue what's going to happen next year. You can guess, but you don't know. You don't know what trial you may face, your family might face, our church might face, our country might face, and our world might face. Granted, all of us will probably have some blessings and some really good things happen this coming year. But we do not know what the challenges are that we are going to face. But here's what we do know as the clock strikes midnight and the new year begins, that no matter what we face in the new year, we have a God who will guide us every step of the way. And that's why we can enter the new year trusting in the Lord with all of our heart, Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Not leaning on our own understanding. In all our ways, acknowledging him and knowing that he will direct our paths. So when I look at those 3 feasts in which all male Israelites had to gather in Jerusalem to celebrate, I see a connection between our holiday season. Because our holiday season is a celebration of a God who provides. Our holiday is a celebration of a God who rescues. And our holiday season is a celebration of a God who guides us. But as I looked further at those 3 feasts in which every male Israelite had to travel to Jerusalem to celebrate, I saw some common denominators. I saw some things that were true in all 3 feasts. And these 3 common denominators, I believe, can bring more meaning into our holiday season this year. So let me wrap up the series by sharing those 3 common denominators with you. In all 3 of those feasts, the first thing I saw was gratitude. Every one of those feasts involved gratitude. At Passover, they gave thanks for the barley harvest. They gave thanks for God's protection from the final plague in Egypt, the death angel that killed the firstborn child in every home. They gave thanks for his freeing them from slavery in Egypt. And so describing that feast in Deuteronomy 16, verse 1, it says, observe the month of Abib and celebrate the Passover to the Lord your God. For in the month of Abib, the Lord your God brought you out of Egypt by night. So thanksgiving, gratitude, an attitude of gratitude was involved in the feast of Passover and unleavened bread. But it was also involved in the feast of Pentecost, or weeks. At that feast, they gave thanks for the wheat harvest. They gave thanks for God giving them the law through Moses. And speaking of that feast in Deuteronomy 16, verse 11, it says, you shall rejoice before the Lord your God. There was an element of gratitude. And then, at the Feast of Tabernacles, they gave thanks for the harvest of grapes, olives, figs, and pomegranates. And they gave thanks to God for how he provided for their ancestors while they were wandering in the wilderness. And in Deuteronomy 16:14, based on that feast, it says, you will rejoice in your feast. All 3 of those feasts in which all male Israelites had to gather together in Jerusalem to celebrate, all 3 of them involved an attitude of gratitude. Now, we do a pretty good job of that at Thanksgiving, don't we? We think about that. Unfortunately for many, Once we hit the turkey coma at the end of the day, the attitude of gratitude isn't in the forefront of our mind anymore. Imagine how different your holiday season could be if every day you paused, even if just for a minute or two, to find something new to give God thanks for. Think of it. What if the attitude of gratitude didn't end at Thanksgiving, but went on all the way through the holiday season? You see, typically in our culture, here's what happens. When Thanksgiving is over, we move from what we're thankful for to what we want for Christmas. Right? Isn't that the question we ask our kids? What do you want for Christmas? We ask our grandkids, what do you want for Christmas? My wife asks me, what do you want for Christmas? I don't know. And that's good. Nothing wrong with that. But I wonder if we would make a concerted effort to say every day now through the end of the holiday season, I'm going to take a moment and find something new to thank God for. By the way, can I challenge your perspective on that for a second? I got thinking about that this week. I got thinking about how when it comes to gratitude, being thankful, what is typically our focus? We are thankful for what we have, right? We're thankful for the blessings. We're thankful for what we have, and that's a very good thing, very good thing. But I wonder if maybe, just maybe, we should make the emphasis in our gratitude. Listen, not focus solely on what we have. Here's what I'm thankful for. But rather, here's who I'm thankful to. I wonder if maybe our focus should be more on the God we're thanking rather than the things we're thanking him for. But gratitude was part of all three of those celebrations. And I believe our holiday season can become far more meaningful if we will make it a daily part of our holiday celebration this year. So number one, I saw gratitude. Number two, I saw generosity. In all three of these feasts, there were different sacrifices made to the Lord. In fact, if you remember when I first read to you from Deuteronomy about those three feasts, it said, and do not come empty-handed. All three feasts included a sacrifice given to the Lord. At Passover, they sacrificed a lamb to the Lord. Deuteronomy 16:2. You shall sacrifice the Passover to the Lord your God from the flock and the herd in the place where the Lord chooses. At Pentecost, they gave a free will offering to the Lord. Look at Deuteronomy 16:10. Then you shall celebrate the Feast of Weeks to the Lord your God with a tribute of a free will offering of your hand, which you shall give just as the Lord your God blessed you. And at Tabernacles, which ultimately was an 8-day celebration, they actually made an offering to the Lord every single day. Look at Leviticus 23, verse 36. For 7 days, you'll present an offering by fire to the Lord. And then on the 8th day, you'll have a holy convocation and you'll present another offering by fire to the Lord. All three of these celebrations involved generosity. And I can't help but wonder how much more meaningful our entire holiday season would be if we could intentionally find different ways to be a little bit generous. It's not always with money. Sometimes it's with our time. Sometimes it's just buying someone's cup of coffee who's behind you. Or maybe an extra gift to the Lord, whatever it is. But I believe if we made gratitude a daily part of our holiday season, and to the best of our abilities made generosity a regular part of our holiday season, that our holidays would be so much more meaningful. Laura and I were talking this week. It was 15 years ago this month that Laura and myself and my kids drove into Gaylord, Michigan for the very first time. It was the weekend before Christmas. And we were looking at the church. We were able to attend a service, get a tour of the church. I was able to have a private luncheon with Pastor Jim Mathis, the former lead pastor. And I remember that Marcus Wegmeyer, he and I talked about this just last week. He was the search team chairman. He's right now down in the classic service. He was taking us on a tour, a driving tour of Gaylord. You know, that 2-minute driving tour of Gaylord, you know what I'm saying? And as he drove us through Mishaway, this beautiful snow began to fall. He said he planned it that way. And all I know is almost like God was saying, this is it. This is going to be home for you. And then it became home. And I've had the privilege of being your pastor. It'll be 15 years this March. And I think about what God has done and how thankful I am for this church. Because when I came here 15 years ago, I came very wounded. Had a huge ministry hurt. Didn't even know if I wanted to be back in ministry. In fact, I spent 6 months before I came here working in a State Farm insurance office. Thought about maybe just continuing to do that because, frankly, I was pretty good at it, you know. But God used this church to bring healing in my life. God used this church to restore to me the joy of being in ministry. And I'm thankful that I've been able to work for 15 years with spiritual leaders, elders of our church, men who are men of vision and faith. And I'm so thankful to pastor a church that grabs hold of the vision. But the one thing that I've noticed about this church, I'm so very thankful for, and that I think is one of the main reasons why God blesses our church, is I've never seen a church more generous than this church. And I think about just this past year. We moved into this year with the largest general fund budget we ever had. And giving is going to surpass that through the year, which is amazing. I think about our elder fund. You know, every communion, we take that little offering at the end for the elder fund to help people who have need in their life, in our community, in our church. And we got an update from Doug Robinson, who kind of oversees that for the elders at our last elder meeting. And when this year is over, we will have given out nearly $100,000 from the elder fund to people that have needs and are hurting. And it's all funded by those little communion offerings that take place once a month. I think about the Operation Christmas Child boxes and how this year between our campus, the Sioux campus, the Alpena campus, we were able to send out over 1,000 boxes in Operation Christmas Child. And then I think about in-gathering. And we set the highest goal we've ever had, $300,000. We never had a goal that high. And we have already seen this in-gathering offering be the largest in-gathering offering since I've been the pastor. And as of this morning, we are right at about the $288,000 mark. We're 96% of the way to that top goal. And that fund does stay open till the end of the year. Just saying, just throwing that out. It does stay open. And but I just think about how generous this church is. And I really do believe that's one of the main reasons that God blesses our church. And to think of how more meaningful our holiday season can be if each of us would find more regular ways, even if it's not monetary, to practice generosity. So when I look at those feasts, I see a common denominator of gratitude. I see a common denominator of generosity. And here's the third one. The third common denominator was gathering. They gathered together. I'm not talking about just gathering as a family. Like we do that. That's good. We do that for the holidays. I'm talking about they gathered together as the people of God. Right? In Deuteronomy 16, verse 16, 3 times a year, all your males shall appear before the Lord your God for these 3 feasts. They gather together as the people of God. But many of them involve more than just that. In Deuteronomy 16, verse 11, you will rejoice before the Lord your God, you and your son and your daughter and your male servants and your female servants and the Levite and the stranger and the orphan and the widow. They all gather together. You see that in Deuteronomy 16, verse 14. You will rejoice in your feast, you and your son and your daughter and your servants and the Levite and the stranger and the orphan and the widow who are in your towns. For these 3 feasts, they didn't just gather together as families. They gathered together as the people of God. It was a major element of their celebration. And I truly believe there is something amazingly powerful when the people of God gather together to celebrate these special holidays. And that's why as we move into the Christmas season, we will have so many opportunities. In fact, I counted it up this week, beginning next Saturday, December 14th, because our first TV broadcast of the weekend happens on Saturday night. Beginning next Saturday, the 14th, through Christmas Eve, the 24th. In case you didn't know, Christmas Eve, the 24th. For those 11 days, between live services, TV broadcasts, radio broadcasts, online broadcasts, we will have 28 services taking place in 11 days. Opportunities for people to gather together, even if it's remotely, gathering together to celebrate. And the main Christmas ones, I'm very excited about. And it will all kick off 2 weeks from tonight in Alpena. And December 22nd at 6 p.m. will be our very first live worship service at our Alpena campus, as we have a special Christmas candlelight service. There'll be live worship. I'll be there speaking live. We'll be in the gym with the video wall set up, all the chairs set up. It is going to be such a special night. And I want to say to our Alpena Watch group, it is over the next 2 weeks, it is your time to shine, because you're the ones who know the promotional aspects of Alpena. I don't. You know what social media pages to put it on. You know how to get the word out. You know all the people to invite. And I want to encourage our watch group in Alpena, just grab hold of it and go for it. Get that information out. Maybe even gather together one day and go through the neighborhoods around our facility, inviting people to come. And if you, no matter where you're listening today, if you know anyone that lives in Alpena, around Alpena, make sure they know Sunday night, December 22nd, 6 p.m. at our Alpena facility. It's going to kick it all off. Our Sault Ste. Marie campus, you'll have your Christmas candlelight service at 5:30 on Christmas Eve, and Jeff Middlestead, our point person up there, will be leading that service. I encourage you to invite everyone you know. Pack that place out. At the Gaither campus, we're going to actually have 4 opportunities Christmas Eve. 3 of the 4 are unique, so you can actually attend more than one if you would like. It's going to start at 12 noon. On Christmas Eve, my wife and I are going to lead a classic Christmas Eve service down in the chapel. For those that maybe want a little more traditional, or maybe just want things a little more mild, that's going to happen at 12 noon down in the chapel. And we will have no childcare for that one, though, okay? But 12 noon down in the chapel. Then our 2 main services, Christmas candlelight, Christmas Eve services, here in the main auditorium will be 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock, and they'll be packed. 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock, there will be childcare for newborns through age 4 that will be provided for those 2 services. And then at 6 o'clock, and I'm really excited about this, because at 6 o'clock, we're not just going to gather together as an E-Free family. we're going to gather together with a little bit broader family of God as we gather with Pastor Derek Haglin and the church family of Grace Baptist Church here in town. We're all going to gather together at 6 o'clock under the pavilion downtown for a 30-minute community Christmas Eve reflection time. It'll be very informal. No chairs, just all going to stand around, just 30 minutes. There'll be free hot chocolate. And I know that Grace Baptist Church is going to be providing special music. Pastor Derek's going to read the Christmas story. Our worship team will be leading in some Christmas carols. I'll be telling the Wally story, which may or may not make you want to come. But anyway, all of that will take place under the pavilion for just 30 minutes. I think it's going to be such a cool way to wrap up all of our Christmas Eve celebration. So if you're going to the noon service, come to 6 as well. Or if you're going to 2 or 4, come to 6 as well. We'd love to have that. But I also realize many of you will not be here Christmas Eve. You'll be traveling. And that's the beauty of our online campus, because our 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock service will also be broadcast live online, so you can gather with us no matter where you're going to be on Christmas Eve. In fact, let me ask you a question. How many of you are going to be away from a family member on Christmas Eve? A family member will not be with you. Some family member, okay? Quite a few of you. Here's a way you can still kind of do something together. If you're coming to the 2 o'clock service, have them watch it. And they're watching the same service you're at. It's almost like you're together. So all of that happening on Christmas Eve. They're all ways for us to gather together. So what can we learn from those 3 feasts to help make our holiday season more meaningful today? I think it'll be more meaningful if we'll develop the daily habit of gratitude, the regular habit of generosity, and if we become committed to gathering together. And by the way, you make those 3 things a priority in your life all year long, and that is a very literal way that you can celebrate the holidays all year long. Jeff's going to take over up at our Sioux campus and Marcus down at our classic service. Here in the main auditorium, would you stand with me, please, for prayer? So, Father, I have been so amazed as I've studied these feasts, not just learning the history of them, but seeing how they connect with us today. I love that about you. And I love the fact that today we can really focus our attention through this holiday season on gratitude, on generosity, and on gathering together. Because today we get to celebrate this holiday season the fact that Emmanuel has come. God with us. The greatest rescue mission in the history of the world. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.